Hi, everyone. Welcome. Before I start, I want to say thanks to the Alumni Association of UCSC for welcoming us here today, to thank Shayna and other organizers who made this happen. I'm really grateful to be here. So I know that this is Alumni Weekend, and I'm thinking about how it must feel for you all to be back on campus, and for those of you who are staying here, sleeping under the beautiful Redwoods. I'm happy to see that so many of you are here to receive a lecture today, and you'll be pleased to know that this class does not include any midterms, narrative evaluations, or grades. Maybe it's the spirit that we all came to UCSC with, to just be freely here in this classroom to learn together. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Brooke Lober, and I graduated from UCSC in 2003 with a bachelor's degree in American Studies and Art. I was affiliated with Oaks College, but I spent most of my time here in the art studios. While I was on campus, I was busy becoming a movement radical. As an undergraduate, I was a photographer and a musician on the underground Santa Cruz music scene, and I also worked in harm reduction, which was, at that time, a fairly new response to the AIDS crisis and to related crises that, in Santa Cruz, was an effort that was led by young women. In these and in other projects, I was involved in the exciting new feminist, queer, and trans movements. Some people called it the third wave. And I began to develop my own voice in this movement while I was in Bettina's lectures. Alongside one of my lifelong best friends, Nova Ray, in 2002, I TA'd my own section of Bettina's lecture, the 475 student course, Intro to Feminisms. And in my section, I bet maybe some of you did too. And in my section, I know there's kind of a cohort of us who had the opportunity to be those TAs and to be in those classes. And in my section, I got to focus our discussion on feminism and arts. The next year, I taught my own student-led seminar in arts and feminisms, and Bettina and her partner, Kate, kindly joined my class to share Kate's quilts and to present a feminist perspective on the traditional women's art of quilt making. Today, I'm a lecturer in gender and women's studies at UC Berkeley and also at Sonoma State University. I participate in the movements that I write about, feminist formations that bring queer, trans, anti-racist, and anti-imperialist frameworks to bear on the conditions and on the liberatory movements of people targeted by racial capitalism, state violence, incarceration, colonization, borders, and war. I'm honored to welcome Professor Emerita Bettina Aptheker today. Professor Aptheker began her time at UCSC as a graduate student, receiving her PhD in 1983. She began her tenure track as a faculty member in the Feminist Studies Department in 1986, and she taught thousands of students, retiring in 2018. Most recently, she was awarded the first UCSC Ethos Award at the Distinguished Alumni Awards ceremony, celebrating her embodiment of the spirit of this great university. I can't quite imagine the excitement and maybe the drama of Bettina's early years at UC Santa Cruz. She had just recently come out publicly as a lesbian in 1979 at the age of 35, approximately. As she discusses in her recent investigation, Communists in Closets, Queering the History, 1930s to 1990s, publicly naming herself a lesbian was a much more complex process for Bettina than coming out as a communist. This she did at the age of 21, when such political commitment was only dubiously legal, in an incendiary statement published in the Daily Cal, UC Berkeley's student newspaper, before she won the student government election for the Rules Committee governing free speech in a landslide. For Bettina, coming out as a communist was in some ways uncontroversial because, as she writes, this commitment was emotionally congruent with my family and friends. From her childhood in a prominent communist family, Bettina became a leader in Berkeley's free speech movement in the 1960s and in the communist sectors associated with Black Power and the prison movement, especially through her organizing of the International Campaign for the Freedom of one of her oldest friends, then political prisoner Angela Davis. From such grounds of these leftist social movements, Bettina joined a generation of Marxist feminists seeking to expand Marxism to take into account the sexual division of labor and the subjugation of women to realms of reproduction as constitutive of capitalism, necessary to the labor theory of value. As Bettina's life work would soon evidence, the unjust marginalization, silencing, and oppression of lesbian, gay, and other queer trans people in communist history was also an attempted demobilization of queer and trans Marxists, but they could not be stopped from contributing vibrantly to post-Stonewall, late 20th and early 20th century theories and methods for social change. In the 1980s, transforming her research methods to explore standpoint epistemology, Bettina put women at the center to theorize the difference that emerges from women's stories wrought in the reproductive sphere, which she called the dailiness of women's lives. Bettina became a foundational voice on themes such as feminist standpoint epistemology and related feminist theories, lesbian feminism, intersectional feminism, and also, importantly, in anti-violence feminisms. In recent years, Bettina's commitment to the development of feminist consciousness challenged her to bravely live what theorist Sarah Ahmed calls a feminist life, one replete with memory work, with understanding and transforming systems of power collectively from the ground of experience. What I remember most is Bettina's voice in her definition and redefinition of feminism, that women will have at least as much to say as men about everything in the arrangement of human affairs. That feminism is the collective empowerment of women, and that the tall agenda of a radically transformed world is our horizon. As defined in Bettina's classroom, feminism calls for a radical reconstruction of human society. Please join me in welcoming Bettina Aptheker.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Thank you, Brooke. Well, this is a lot of fun. How you doing? I admire you coming out here to hear this old codger when you have this beautiful day out there. So I'll do my best, so you'll enjoy yourselves. So I'm really delighted to be with you here. Now, we have a little bit of back on this. Do I need to? Okay. Okay, that's better. Okay, thank you. And I wanted to thank the Alumni Association for inviting me to do this talk today. And for Shayna and Kayla and Tracy and everyone, and also Carrie from the humanities side of things. And a very special gratitude, and I know he's here, although I don't know where he's sitting at the moment, to Michael Tassio, who is Associate Vice Provost for Education Innovation. Michael was the persistent voice urging me to do an online course, to which I finally acceded. Little did I know. So here's the story. This is what I'm talking about today, feminism and social justice, global perspectives. Shortly after I retired, I filmed a course called Feminism and Social Justice for MOOC, M-O-O-C, the acronym which means Massive Online Learning Course, here at UCSC. On International Women's Day, March 8th, 2019, the course was launched on the Coursera platform. I did 4 lectures. Access to anyone was free. Access was free to anyone and anywhere in the world, unless you wanted a certificate of completion. Sometimes people wanted that for professional development or something, and then there was a fee. As of this week, the total enrollment in feminism and social justice is 119,552 students. I had no idea that anything like that would possibly happen. And about 150 to 200 students are still enrolling each week. So the class continues to grow. We reached 100,000 course takers by early December 2022. And I was informed then that we had students from, as Michael put it, every, quote, inhabited continent. I'm glad it wasn't every uninhabited continent. But I love that phrase. The demographics are interesting. The top 10 countries from which the students came were India, the United States, Mexico, Brazil, United Kingdom, Canada, Turkey, Colombia, Philippines, and Italy. Isn't that interesting? 80% were women, 19% were men, and 1% were undeclared, which I assume to mean non-binary. The largest age groups were between 25 and 34, followed by 35 to 44. So that was the heart of the numbers. And then there were lesser percentages in both directions. So some went all the way down to, I corresponded, as you'll see, with teenagers who were 15 years old. And then also demographically of interest, about 35% of the students had bachelor's degrees, 22% a master's degree, 13% had a high school diploma, and about the same number having some college but no degree. I taught the course in English, and Coursera provides translation in about a dozen languages. Thousands posted on the Coursera platform, mostly in English, some in Spanish, and I'm sure in other languages. Those are the languages I saw. I was quite simply overwhelmed by this response. I had no idea what online learning could do. In addition to those who initiated responses to the course, Coursera formally invited students to give their own definitions of feminism, and thousands responded to that call. In addition, several dozens of students have written to me directly on email, and I have corresponded with them, in some cases at length. Others have befriended me on Facebook and LinkedIn. These are some of their stories that I want to share with you today. Their reflections give us a preliminary sense of a global perspective on social justice from a feminist point of view. Now, in order to give you some context, I want to briefly describe the course that I taught so that you know what I said, at least more or less what I said. The first lecture, I offered my definition of feminism, and thank you, Brooke, for quoting from it. But it's a very broad definition of feminism that encompasses many issues. For those of you, how many of you have took classes with me? Oh my goodness. All right, so you remember I did that working definition of feminism, and it expanded over the years because issues arose and changed and so forth. But so I used it as a basis for the first lecture in this series. And I, in particular, called attention to intersectional feminist analysis or feminist studies. And by this, we mean that discrimination is systemic and not the fault of any particular individual, and that systems of domination, racism, sexism, class exploitation, homophobia, colonialism, Islamophobia, and so on, intersect with one another, mapping our different locations along a spectrum of women's inequality and women's oppression. For example, I am white, so while I am affected by racism, because we all are, anyone who lives in this culture, in this country, is affected by racism, but I'm not the object of racial oppression. I'm not subjected to racial oppression. On the other hand, I'm Jewish, so I have experienced anti-Semitism. I am also a lesbian, as Brooke so eloquently described. And I have to say that I'm still with Kate. We got married in 2013 as soon as we could, when the law changed, and we've been together for 37 years. And we got married on the this isn't in my script, but anyway, we got married on the courthouse lawn here in Santa Cruz, and our children, including our daughter who lives in British Columbia with her husband, all our children came and our grandchildren came. And so then you know how they say that you will take care of each other, in the future, like something like that. So I said to the woman who was reading this, I said, we already did all that. Anyway, this year we'll celebrate 45 years. So having said that, all right, so I've experienced a good deal of homophobia, obviously, all right. So my point here is all of that intersects, so the anti-Semitism, the homophobia intersects with my identity as a woman who experiences sexism, right? Okay, that's what we mean by intersectional. So for example, for a black woman would experience racism, yes, that would intersect with the sexism and in very complex ways. Okay. So we map these individual identities onto a larger sociological map, and you get a picture of how systems of domination interact with each other and reinforce hierarchies. And of course, all of this becomes culturally specific, right? So it varies from culture to culture in different ways. So that was my first lecture. The second lecture focused on a strike by zinc miners in New Mexico in 1951, who were mostly of Mexican heritage and members of the Mine, Mill, and Smelters Workers Union. This strike was memorialized in a film called Salt of the Earth. Any of you see it? Salt of the Earth? A few people? Beautiful film. Okay, the main issues of the strike were health and safety for the workers in the mines, portal-to-portal pay, which means, you go way down into the mine and they weren't paying the miners for the hour that it would take to get down and the hour that it would take to get back. So they wanted what they called portal-to-portal pay. And they wanted pay equity with workers in other nearby mines who were predominantly white. The Mexican workers lived in poorly constructed company housing and were forced to buy their groceries at the company-owned store. They were always in debt and always poor. From a feminist perspective, the significance of the strike was that the mine owners invoked a court-ordered injunction prohibiting them from picketing, which of course was intended to cripple the strike. At a union meeting addressing this crisis, the women, the wives, mothers, and sisters of the miners, organized in the union auxiliary, suggested that they take over the picket lines because the court injunction was not against them. The union men were finally persuaded to allow this, their sexist assumptions and manhood pride notwithstanding. The women did take over the line, and nothing broke them. Not tear gassing, not police harassment, not jail, not beatings, nothing. They held firm. Also, the men got a taste of what it was like to take care of children 8 hours a day and do the laundry and other such tasks. There's a lot more to the story, but by the end, the union prevailed. In addition, however, the US government tried to suppress the making of the film Salt of the Earth because this was at the height of the McCarthy period and anti-communist persecutions. The film's director and producer had been blacklisted, and the lead actress, Rosaura Revueltas, was a member of the Mexican Communist Party. She was also Mexico's most famous actress at the time. Although she was legally in the country, government agents arrested her and deported her to Mexico without so much as a hearing. That was to prevent the completion of the film, but they failed in that effort. They got it completed. In the struggle of making the film, feminism and social justice prevailed. Third lecture was about the trial of Angela Davis. Again, thanking Brooke for already mentioning that, and the movement to free her. Now, some of you may be more familiar with this movement and perhaps remember it. Angela was facing the death penalty, charged with first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit both. These charges stemmed from an abortive prisoner uprising escape from the Marin County Courthouse on August 7, 1970. This was led by a 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson, the younger brother of George Jackson, who's most well known from the Soledad brothers, if that case sort of rattles your memory a little bit. The Soledad brothers had been accused of killing a prison guard at Soledad, and Angela had risen to the Soledad brothers' defense, as had many of us, knowing that the charges against them were unwarranted and the result of their efforts for prison reform at Soledad. In the revolt on August 7th, a judge was killed, a district attorney seriously wounded, a juror slightly wounded. Jonathan was killed along with 2 of the escaping prisoners. All of the deaths were caused by San Quentin prison guards who opened fire to prevent the escape regardless of hostages. One prisoner, Rochelle McGee, was severely wounded and survived. Initially, he was Angela's co-defendant until their cases were severed by mutual consent. Several of the guns used by Jonathan in the takeover of the courtroom were legally registered to Angela, most of which had been purchased years before. She was never accused of participating in or being present at the courthouse, but of conspiracy. She was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Some of you are old enough to remember that, yes? And when arrested, the President of the United States, you'll remember him, Richard M. Nixon, congratulated the FBI on, quote, its capture of the dangerous terrorist, Angela Davis, close quote, his words. Angela and I were childhood friends. We had known each other since we were about 8. So this lecture was very much based upon my experience in the movement for her freedom. We built a massive international movement to free Angela. We fought for her constitutional right to bail, which had been initially denied, and we won it 500 days after her arrest. Angela's trial was held in San Jose. It lasted 4 months. It was a trial filled with drama, unbearable tension, and at times, hilarity, and everything in between. Among the people who came to Angela's defense and came to the trial were Maya Angelou, Nina Simone, James Baldwin, and I could go on. Aretha Franklin, she didn't come to the trial, but she offered to put up bail. In the end, the jury found Angela not guilty on all counts. Social justice was sustained, and a feminist, black, anti-racist global solidarity won the day. My 4th lecture was on the Me Too movement against violence against women. In the United States, this movement, which began in the early 2000s, was woman-led and initiated by black women. My lecture focused first on Anita Hill. Yeah? Ring bell. Yes, okay. And the confirmation Senate hearing to seat Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas in October 1991. Yes, indeed. I see that all of you remember the first-hand experience. And definitely the name Clarence Thomas, who has haunted us ever since. Now, and you know that Anita Hill had accused Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment, but she herself became subjected to a brutal campaign, impugning her integrity and her motives. A major point I was making here was that Anita Hill put the issue of sexual harassment on the national agenda of the United States for the first time. And tens of thousands of women responded with their own stories, told on campuses and in communities and in state legislative hearings. And an unprecedented number of women ran for elected office, winning again and again on the state level and including for congressional and Senate seats. In the second part of this lecture, I did an analysis of the rape of a housekeeper whose name was Nafisa Diallo. She was raped at an upscale hotel in New York City by a prominent and very wealthy French politician, Dominique Strauss-Kahn. ringing bell with some of you, yes. Also known as DISC, DSK, they pronounced it, who at the time was the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. And he was very much considered a possibility for running for the French presidency. The prima facie evidence of the rape was so abundantly clear that the New York City police arrested Dominique Strauss-Kahn after he had boarded an Air France flight for Paris at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. Eventually, all charges were dropped against him, and there was a private monetary settlement of the case. Enormous power and wealth crushed the truth of a brutal rape of a working-class Muslim woman. So this lecture concluded with a salute to the ongoing global Me Too movement and its significance. Okay, that was the fourth lecture. So now you know basically what I did. As you can see, the lectures in this course focused on movements within the United States. However, as women responded to it in their emails to me and in their written responses online, it was easy for them to extrapolate from the US experiences onto their own. And they took away, they said over and over again, a sense of pride, optimism, courage, and perseverance for what was possible. A woman named Somali Bhattacharya posted on Facebook Wednesday, August 14th, 3 days ago, just as I was preparing for this presentation. She is from Calcutta, India. She was someone who befriended me on Facebook after she took this class. In this part of the world, she wrote, for the first time, a Reclaiming the Night movement of women is taking place, marking a historical moment. While some individuals practice phallocentrism daily, and people with various agendas are joining the movement, we have specific demands. Women from all walks of life, urban, rural, white collar and blue collar, will come together. Although the outcome is uncertain, this movement has transcended the initial case and gained broader significance. Now, I couldn't read the Hindi script that she had posted on Facebook, but I was able to find out what she was referring to from a Reuters report, a press report on Thursday, August 15th. This movement was in response to the rape and murder of a young woman doctor in a Calcutta hospital who had just completed 20 hours of a 36-hour shift and had gone into a quiet, isolated room at the hospital to sleep. Reuters reported that, quote, holding candles, hundreds of thousands of women marched through the night in cities across India to protest the brutal rape and murder of a young female doctor in a hospital that has fueled anger over a lack of safety for women despite tough new laws, close quote. The women were in the streets all night, beginning on the eve marking India's 78th year of independence. Prime Minister Narendra responded affirmatively to the protests, but promised no specific action. Now, for months, I have been corresponding with another student from the course who lives in Kolkata. Her name is Sneha Hake. I'm doing my best to pronounce because I'm not sure. It's Haque, Hake, I think. And Sneha, Sneha, is her first name. She completed her university bachelor's degree this summer and is a strong feminist scholar. I emailed her since the protests erupted and hope that she is safe, and I'm waiting for her response. Our initial lengthy correspondence centered around her deep desire to continue her education and enter a doctoral program. She described herself as from a lower middle-class family, and so, of course, she doesn't have the money to pursue a doctorate. We have been exploring scholarship options, and I have studied 3 very strong feminist essays that she wrote. They are titled Pedagogy of Love, Care, and Empathy, Feminist Critique of Rationality, and Theorizing Work and Will in Prostitution. They're all in English. I don't know if she originally wrote them in Hindi and sent them to me in English. I'm not clear, but the English is impeccable. She is sophisticated in feminist philosophy and theory, and her critique of rationality paper drew heavily upon the work of French feminists. I recently shipped her a bunch of books, including bell hooks, and I anxiously await an email from her. Another Indian woman with whom I have corresponded extensively and met on Zoom was Dr. Hemlata Mahawar in the Department of Sociology at the Maharana Pratap Government College in Chittagore. I learned that Chittagore is a major city in Western India. Most of their students, Hemlata informed me, were from the tribal communities in the mountains above the city. She works primarily with the young women. The tribal communities are very poor, and proper health care and hygiene are major concerns. Hemlata, bless you, also emphasized to me that horrific violence against women is of primary concern for women's well-being, and this was a year before the savage rape and murder in Calcutta. I read several papers and proposals for funding that she sent to me. She also asked me to be what she called an ambassador from Santa Cruz to her college to inspire the young women in terms of their studies and the work that they could do. 3 high school students emailed me. Racia, Christian, and Natalia were seniors at Ateneo de Manila Senior High School in the Philippines. They were tasked with writing a research paper and picked as their topic true feminism. They requested a 45-minute interview that we did on Zoom on September 24th, 2022. They were particularly concerned with deconstructing mainstream Filipino culture in which corporations branded products as feminists with concepts like girl boss. And also in the mainstream, there was condemnation of what was called misandric feminism, meaning feminism, it was hatred of men. So they wanted me to counter, they wanted to do an interview that countered these ideas. What did I think, and what could they do with this misinformation? A 15-year-old high school student wrote to me from Kazakhstan. She declared herself a feminist and said that in her country, violence against women, especially domestic violence, was extensive. She wanted to do something to get involved. Did I know where she could go? Not because she was subject, but to be an ally in the struggle. I consulted with Halima Kazem, an Afghan-American whose dissertation was on feminist history of Afghanistan, which is borders Kazakhstan. I thought she could help, which she did. So Halima gave me the name of a couple of organizations with which this young woman could connect. When I wrote back to her, however, I also urged her to finish her high school education and to work closely with her parents. I did this because I was worried about protecting her and her safety from a government that I know is not very sympathetic with feminist ideas and this kind of correspondence, and I didn't know how secure it was. Email is not secure. Another woman, Diane Maz, M-A-Z, wrote to me from Iran. She's in Tehran. She is Iranian of Azerbaijan heritage. She was also a high school student. She wrote and spoke English extremely well. Would I do a podcast with her on women's history? Yes, I said cautiously. And would she please consult with her mom about this? After all, we are all very aware of the repression of women in Iran and the awful deaths of Iranian women, young women, at the hands of the security police over their refusal to wear the hijab. Diane consulted with her mom, who thought it would be all right if we focused on some aspect of U.S. women's history. And so Diane and I did a mini course together on that history, in which she read a few works I suggested, and that was available to her online. The internet is amazing. And then we did a 1-hour podcast. Of course, it wasn't that hard to extrapolate from some of this history, especially slavery and abolition, and to the struggles and the history of Iranian women. Another woman from Iran at the University of Tehran emailed me, a graduate student in cultural anthropology. Would I read a paper she wrote? Her professor refused to read it. And who else could she send it to? I consulted with my dear neighbor, Roya Pakzad, who is Iranian and a human rights worker. She gave me the names of several faculty in the United States and in Iran who this young woman could reach out to. And Roya urged me to also read the paper. So I emailed back, and I said I would read it, and I didn't hear back from her for a very, very long time. And then one day, a massive PDF file arrived attached to her email. It was the paper. She had translated it from Farsi to English. It was a fine piece, even though the English translation was not, it was rough. But I could understand what she was saying very easily. And she had translated, she developed an argument from the review of Western cultural anthropologists, and then an impassioned argument for women to be able to freely choose whether or not to wear the hijab. Here are some reflections we received from the Coursera site. As a black woman, so I'm quoting, as a black woman, my definition of feminism is entangled with intersectionality. In this sense, black feminism is my working basis of a definition. Primary feminist struggles in my country are that of bodily autonomy. In my culture, feminist struggles include the fight to be recognized as a fully developed, emotional human and deserving of community and communal support. My definition of feminism is layered and thus differs from the one pro-offered in this course. She doesn't say her country, and I assumed it was the US, but that may not be right. I'm not sure. From Ghana. Feminism to me is about creating equal opportunities for all people, regardless of sexes, to express themselves and fully participate in the construction of the living conditions that most affect them without coercion. Another woman wrote, quote, I am Ukrainian, and now during the war I can observe the feminist at its finest in my country. Brave women fight on battlefields, they cure people, they sacrifice themselves, they volunteer and bring awareness about the war all over the world. On the other hand, Russia, which attacked my country, has once more proved they couldn't care less about human rights by raping, killing, kidnapping, and enslaving our women, children, and even elderly people. And the Russian feminisms I used to respect are silent about these crimes. So I admire Ukrainian women, the strongest people on earth. From Puerto Rico. I define feminism as a social movement directed at promoting rights and egalitarian treatment of women in society and empowering them to stand and fight for their fair treatment. It's a social movement that aims to dismantle patriarchy within our society, to remove gender-based discrimination within the working environment. In Puerto Rico, there is a plethora of issues involving women's rights and safety. Some examples include the rise in the rates of femicides and gender-based violence, economic inequality in the workplace, the lack of healthcare access to treatments such as abortion and sex education. Another woman reflected on the necessity, quote, and she didn't identify her country. She said she reflected on the necessity, quote, for reparations to be paid by colonial empires to its previously colonized countries, and included this in defining feminist struggles. And again, she didn't state her country of origin. From Colombia, writing in Spanish and translated by Google, a woman wrote, when talking about the independence or liberation of a group of human beings, we talk about everything, economics, culture, religion, and 1,000 other things. Feminism defends respect for everyone, exalting and exposing the problems, especially that women suffer. In my country, Colombia, we fight more than anything for our safety. Another wrote, my name is Tusif, and I am from a far-off village in Pakistan. As far as I think, you may already know the social and economical conditions of Pakistani women. I am the only feminist in my town. defending women's rights against toxic masculinity and Islamic fascism. My name is Inez. I am a Kenyan female political science graduate. Reflecting on the course she wrote, learning the great strides by women, especially women of color, has been inspiring and encouraging and furthers my desire to teach. I am writing this from Istanbul, Turkey, and not in a particularly hopeful time. As a young scholar currently working on ever-increasing femicide rates in Turkey and the cultural patterns of dangerous masculinities, one day I am hoping to teach my own body of work to keep this movement going. An Israeli woman writes, and this is before what's going on in Israel now, it was earlier. The primary feminist struggle in my society in Israel is, in my opinion, against the rape and abuse culture. And since the coronavirus has started 6 months, 19 women were murdered in their house by their partners. And we're talking about a country of less than 10 million, close quote. Another woman writing from Israel who is Palestinian, so she lives in Israel, but she is Palestinian. The women in Palestine are oppressed not as a result of culture, religion, or toxic masculinity, although there are a few such cases as there are elsewhere in the world, unfortunately. The main cause of oppression of women in Palestine is the apartheid and genocide by the Israeli government. For these women to be liberated, Palestine must be liberated. So, of course, as you can see by now, in many of these countries, and this is just a sampling, you know, we could be here a long time and probably here too long already, but you can see that safety, domestic violence, and sexual violence are very prominent issues in almost every country. And then the economic and the poverty, you know, and you can see that they're intertwined, so that's part of that intersectional analysis that we were talking about. So there were thousands of responses with comments, analysis, and reflections on feminism and social justice. And I have shared with you some of what I have seen. My correspondence and Zoom meetings with some of these women has been extraordinary and inspiring experience for me. How much we are all part of one another, how many movements there are in so many countries, how much courage, perseverance, and sheer brilliance can we see of the women in a feminist global community. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'm very happy to take the Q&A. I think the only thing is you can see that they're filming, and so Brooke has the microphone, and if you want to make a comment or anything, well, ask a question, whatever, we want it recorded so that we have that. The floor is open, and you can ask me about anything. I mean, if I don't know the answer, I'll either make it up or I'll tell you that I don't know. Sure it will.
Hi. Well, I'm just wondering how you feel about this new religious movement to put women back to making babies, and that's their only purpose.
I think you're referring to a certain vice presidential candidate. Yes. I know. I don't know if you saw the meme. I saw a hilarious meme. It was all these women lined up with their cats, waiting to vote. It was so funny. Oh my gosh. Anyway, it's very interesting because he started out talking about the decline in the birth rates in the United States. And of course, he didn't say it, but he's talking about white women's birth rates. He's not talking about women of color, okay. But the thing about that is that, you know, as a historian, I know that slogan goes all the way back to the early part of the 20th century. with various candidates and campaigns and so forth, when there was also a decline, was after women won the right to vote. It's very, it's interesting to think about that, you see. And there was a decline in the birth rate, and so they started talking about the importance of women having babies and so on. And it's so obviously I think that was not a good thing for him to have said. And I think it alienated a lot of women. And I mean, women that aren't, were maybe on the fence or hadn't decided yet, or a lot of things like that. So they're talking about a lot of like independent voters and suburban women and so forth. So I think it's very backward. But the thing I have to say is what's terrifying is right now to me is how close the election is, right? And after everything that has gone down with Trump and everything he's said and done and been convicted of a felony and been convicted of rape also. And it just feels, so that's a little, on the other hand, Kamala is ascending. There's a momentum. So to me, that's positive. I mean, this is the reality of what we have right now, to deal with. So I see that, yeah. But anyway, I'm glad you asked the question. Of course, my childbearing years are over. And I also noted that the San Francisco Opera this season is doing Handmaid's Tale. And I don't think that's an accident. I think the music director is a Korean woman. And I think Eun Sun, I think is how to pronounce her name. And she makes the decisions about what operas are going to be performed. And this is a co-production with the Danish Opera Company. And it's playing, it'll start later in September. You might want to check it out. You might want to think about going and seeing it. It's also made into a film, of course, and the novel and so on. But just a thought. Thank you. Yes, down here. Yes.
Thank you.
I now live in a small rural town where the progressives are outnumbered by Republicans about 2-1. And so I mostly stick to my small progressive circle of friends, and when I'm interacting with the other people, I don't talk about politics at all. But I wondered if you have ideas about how to communicate with people on the other side in a way that's productive and respectful.
Well, I agree with you. I think I agree with the premise of what you're saying. I think it's really important to try to create dialogue when we can with people. And also not to demonize people. I'm not quite sure how. I know that when I do one-on-one communications with people, I try to look at them very directly. I try to find out something about them, like what their experiences have been, or why those experiences have led them to a certain set of beliefs. Because a lot of times, people are suffering. A lot of people are suffering in this country with a medical system, with poverty, or with great anxiety about money, even if they're not in poverty, or the long coronavirus. And then there's all this junk that's on social media where people will say anything. I mean, post anything. So there's all these conspiracy theories and things like that I think confuse people. I just think people get really confused. So that's where I would try one-on-one and just have a conversation. Even if it's over the lettuce in the grocery store, just to try to make some kind of connection, or with a neighbor or something like that, without demonizing and without thinking that someone is, without calling people names or anything, but just see what their experience has been. Because a lot of times, once you do that, and I'm good friends with a guy named Ben Jealous, and Ben was the head of the NAACP for a number of years. He's about the same age as my children, so he's in his late 40s, early 50s, and so African American, and he talks a lot about an experience he had where he was campaigning with Bernie Sanders. This was back in 2016, before Hillary became the candidate. And he said they were in a working class town, somewhere like it wasn't West Virginia, but it was like that. And I'm not quite sure where it was. All these white workers. And he was really nervous about it, how it was going to go and so forth. And they really responded to the class issues that Bernie was hitting on. They really responded to that. And I remember him talking about that. And so then he could slide in and start talking about some of the conditions that black workers were living under. And those workers could listen to that. Those working class people could listen to that because their experiences had already been acknowledged, see. So I thought that was a good, and not to write anybody off. Don't write anybody off. We mustn't do that. We try to bring the country together in some kind of way rather than increasing the polarization if we possibly can. Yeah. It's one of the things I like about Kamala. I mean, we can talk about her in various ways, but one of the things I really like about her is the joy and the humor. And she's not so, dread-ridden. And the other thing I have to say about Kamala is that I am like 99% certain that I marched with her mother. Because we organized a lot of those protests in Berkeley in the late 60s against the war in Vietnam, and her mother was a big participant in them. And I'm just certain, I think we marched together. It's a good heritage.
Bettina, can you tell us a little bit about how you feel about radical feminism? I was surprised to find that, as feminist, I think it must have been during coronavirus, when we were all sort of like locked in our homes. I joined a radical feminist group online, and then they quickly booted me out. Must have been some comments that I made, but I was really interested to then start to do a little bit of research and realize, okay, I guess I'm not a radical feminist, but I'd be really curious for your views.
I think a lot depends on context. Yeah. By which I mean, this is sort of a little humorous here, but my mother-in-law, so Kate's mother, was from North Dakota. I mean, that's where Kate was raised. She was from North Dakota, okay. Before all the oil bust and everything. It was very, very conservative, Lutheran, and so on. And her mother, when we first took up together, was just so upset about she and I being a lesbian. I mean, I didn't know which was worse, that I was a lesbian, a communist, or Jewish. I mean, it was a mess. You know what I'm saying? It was just a mess. And her mom would say things like, well, you can't do anything worse to me, things like that. So anyway, she got over that. And my point about this is that we won her mother over. And her mother became more and more progressive in her views about things. Very accepting of our family and us, and very willing to listen to some of the politics that we said. But in that context, when she would go home to visit family in Minnesota and North Dakota, she was a radical feminist. So that's why I'm saying that, you see. So I don't know, there are various definitions of radical and feminist. Are some of these women radical feminists that I was quoting? Are the women in India who are marching now, are they radical feminists? Sonia, the woman who wrote to me, pointed out that some of them are that they come from many different walks of life. And some of them participate in patriarchy. She called it phallocentric, you know. But it sounded like she was much more radical than that. Does radical mean on the left? Does radical mean on the left? Does radical mean uprooting the root causes, which is actually the definition of radical, the root causes of women's oppression, racism, and so forth? So I don't know why they booted you out. But the other feature of this is that there's also a tendency in many, many social movements for sectarianism and rigidity and closed off. And I think that's poison. I mean, I saw that in the Communist Party, you know, for all the years I was, I mean, I haven't been in the Communist Party since 1981, which is when I left. So that's more than half my, you know, well more than half my life. But way more than half my life. I'm about to turn 80. It's almost my 80th birthday. But I'm referring to this because I saw the kind of sectarianism that could grip the communist movement very much so and alienate people, you know. So I see that happening on the left in general and in radical and feminist circles also. Yeah. And it's too bad that they weren't willing to dialogue with you rather than just boot you out of something, you know, which always hurts your feelings.
This is maybe not what you were referring to, but Bettina, would you be willing to comment on the appearance of radical anti-transgender feminism?
Oh my God, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh.
TERF is the term. It's a certain version of the word radical, but maybe you would comment on that for us.
I didn't register it that way. I registered. Yeah, oh sure. We'll need to do that. Well, I think the hostility to all trans people is just wrong. It's just wrong. First of all, they're human beings, and you know. But I remember when I sometimes talked about this in Intro to Fem. I think it was mostly in Intro to Feminism. You know, I grew up in a time I was called a tomboy, right? That was the term that was used. And for years, I thought, well, there's men, and there's women, and there's me. Like I didn't fit anywhere. And I never had an idea of trans that you know, and I'm not sure that that's the direction in which I would have gone at all. But I certainly understand it. And I've had many students now who are transgender, and they taught me a lot. And one of the first was a guy named Nicholas, who was in my feminist oral history and memoir class many, many, many years ago now. So Nicholas is his name, and he was transitioning from female to male when I knew him. And also another person I know very well named Allie Cannon, who was a lesbian, a woman when I knew him, and is now a man and has been married for many, many years and has a son and so forth. And they taught me a great deal about how they feel internally and how much easier it is. Like for Nicholas, he talked about, you know, from when he was very, very little, he wanted to wear his brother's clothes. So we used to call that tomboy, but it was something different for him. And then people go through the transition in different ways, right, in terms of hormonal and surgeries and how they want to undertake it. And I think the feminists who have opposed the transgender are just dead wrong. I just think they're dead wrong. I understand that they get annoyed with some prominent transgender women who start talking about women as though because they were originally socialized as boys and men. Do you understand what I mean by that? So they don't really understand the socialization of female. So there's a way in which a certain kind of modesty would be a very good thing. All right? But then on the other hand, I don't want to condemn anybody or say to somebody, you're not a woman, if that's how they feel that they are. And if they act in that way. Now, and I had a group of women I have for many years called History in Action. We have a listserv together, and a few of them formed a feminist anti-trans group. And I really argued with them online, in my emails and so forth, that I thought it was a mistake. And I didn't get very far. I mean, but, you get set ideas about things and so on, so I just let it go. But that's my feeling about it. And we could go into more, detail about other aspects of the trans movement and so on. But that's, like in terms of athletics, for example, there's some issues there. But I just think more power to them. More power to them.
So I hope I asked this right, because it sounds one way in my head, but I don't know how it's going to come out. I've been trying to have a perspective on the weaponization of religion in regards to, especially lately with reproductive rights and just in general kind of, rises in femicide. And I can't tell whether it's gotten worse or not. I'm having trouble with that perspective because it's always kind of been, I was born in the 70s, so I kind of saw that increase as we go along, like 80s and 90s. But it feels worse now, and that's what I can't tell. And I'm wondering what you think of that and what your perspective is in the arc of time.
So are you referring, I just want to clarify, not, do you mean like the religious fundamentalism? Yeah. Is that part of what you're thinking about? Christian nationalism?
Yeah. Yes.
That sort of those?
Yeah. I mean, really using people's Christianity and their values and trying to then mobilize that and weaponize it. Because some people, I think, can be swayed on the basis of what they think that they're supposed to be as a good Christian. And I know not everybody is like that, but I've seen some people who I didn't think would turn that way, kind of turn that way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. They've turned that way, but they've turned that way in a certain kind of context.
Yes.
So this is from, my thoughts about it. Because I think that white supremacy comes in many forms. And white Christian nationalism is racist at its heart. What I'm saying, don't apologize, no, because I'm trying to formulate how to think about it, in a constructive way, is Trump in particular has used this issue in a terrible way. I don't think he could care less about Christianity, or he only cares about himself, but he uses that issue. And so let's take the reproductive rights, for example, and the anti-abortion movement. The people that are anti-abortion are a minority, and they have been all along. You wouldn't know it from all the yelling that's going on. But when you do the polls over and over again, the population has been pro-abortion since Roe v. Wade and before then. Right? So there's a certain way in which Christianity gets mobilized as though it's pro-life. Right? So if it was pro-life, why don't the politicians that embrace it be willing to allocate free child care, free medical care, especially prenatal and postnatal? Why is the infant mortality rate in Mississippi the highest in the United States, and the overall infant mortality rate in the United States, we are 54th in the world. Our infant mortality rate is higher than Bahrain. And that's because of racism, in particular, compounded by poverty in the southern states. Mississippi is awful. Alabama is awful. Louisiana is awful in this regard. Let's talk about Texas. Right? So there's a way in which I try to say to people, if you think you are pro-life, then pass legislation that is pro-life, not to stop women from having babies, to oppose women who don't want to have children. So that's one issue. The other has to do with deep-seated misunderstanding of women's bodily autonomy. We have a right to our own bodies, and we have a right to make decisions about our own bodies. And those Christian women would certainly want to have the right to make decisions about their bodies. And so would Christian men. So they're always talking about the other, not themselves. That's my thought about that. But it's very seductive. It's very seductive. And I like to point out, Martin Luther King was a Christian. A lot of people are Christians who led social justice movements. So I don't, but it's dangerous. It's very dangerous, this sort of mobilization of that. The other thing I wanted to comment on, and it's sort of allied to this, is the whole anti-immigration movement in this country and the fear of immigrants and the way that's been stoked. That's not very Christian. Like to welcome your neighbor and so forth. But it is rooted in racism. Absolutely rooted in racism. And Trump and others exploit that in their attitudes and in their statements that they make about people who are just impoverished and fleeing from all kinds of terrible violence and also climate change. This is a big part of what's happening, of why people are leaving their countries, is because they're uninhabitable. And then these same people are the ones that are denying that climate change is happening and that human beings are responsible for it. It's just mind-boggling to me, you see. So it's riddled with contradictions. That's how I see that. I don't know if that's helpful.
What was your experience coming out openly as a lesbian when identifying like that was much more stigmatized than it is now?
Well, that's a good question. So I was in the closet for so long because I really knew my propensity was toward loving women, but I had no role. Everything was so secret, and I had no role models, and I had nothing. Nobody talked about it except the bars. There were the bars, which in my upbringing was like, you wouldn't go to the bars, so, because that's maybe. But anyway, I had internalized a great deal of homophobia and thinking there was something wrong with me. And it's a stereotype, but I have to tell you that as soon as I was safely married to a man, I had my first lesbian affair. And that is very typical of my generation. Because you see, I thought my husband was the cover, that he covered me. And of course, I was under surveillance by the FBI constantly and had been my whole life. And so they found out. And so that was horrific for me. And I talk about that in the memoir that I wrote, Intimate Politics. But it was very challenging. It was very, very difficult. When Stonewall happened, which was in 1969, I happened to be abroad. I wasn't in the United States at the time, but I read about it later. And I have to say, it scared the bejesus out of me, if you don't mind my saying that way. But it scared me because, and then the other thing was the Communist Party was so homophobic, which Brooke sort of alluded to that already, was so homophobic. And my whole life was built around that kind of a movement. And so I was very closeted from that point of view, but the Communist Party was also hostile to the women's liberation movement. So when the women's liberation movement started, I stayed away from it because in my muddled thinking, I knew there was a connection between lesbian liberation and women's liberation, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't want to know what it was. But Angela Davis taught me my first introduction to feminism class in her jail cell when she asked me to give a paper that she had been invited to give at the American Philosophical Association with a longtime feminist writer whose name was Juliet Mitchell, who had written a book called The Longest Revolution, which was published in 1970. And Angela had been invited to participate, and she was in jail, and she asked me to read the paper for her. And so I went to New York to do that, but she had to teach it to me, because it's actually a big philosophical treatise, and I didn't know half the people she was talking about, and I'd heard of Kant, but I didn't know anything about Kant, and she's so brilliant. So anyway, we were sitting on the floor just outside her jail cell in Palo Alto with all these books and papers around us, and she was going through the thing with me. And what the point about this is, she took white feminism seriously. She took women's oppression seriously. She saw that there was merit to the arguments that were being made, even as she condemned the racism that was sometimes embedded in what white women were saying. And that was like revolutionary for me. And so I thought, well, gee, if Angela thinks this, maybe I ought to, so I started to ease my way into women's history, is what happened. And then that opened the door to women's studies, one little toe at a time. And I was asked at San Jose State, which is where I was living at the time, and I was married, if I would teach a class for women's studies. And I was already teaching a class for Afro-American studies. And I said, yeah, but I don't know the subject. And they said, well, we have somebody that's going to teach it with you. And that's how so I began to put the two things together. And then there were all these young lesbians on the San Jose State campus who totally recognized me, no matter how closeted I thought I was. And so they said, oh, you have to go to this concert, like Meg Christian. You remember? Well, some of you aren't lesbians, so you may not remember. But there were all these lesbian singers, and, of course, there was Holly Near and so on. So they said, we'll take care of your kids. You go to the concert, And of course, I was just like in heaven. It was so wonderful. And, and the music was so funny. And so then I started to sort of think about it more. And then, so it was a long process, is what I want to say. And in the midst of this is probably a longer answer than you wanted, but someone with whom I was very, very close and really loved a lot was dying from cancer prematurely. And the last thing she said to me before she went into a coma, she said, why are you still married? And then she was gone. And I thought about that. Why am I still married? And it wasn't really about my husband. It was a perfectly decent human being. It really wasn't about that. It was about, she was saying to me, why don't you live your life? So that's like a pivotal kind of thing. And then I fell in love with Kate. I was really fortunate. So I had support. See, I had the students at San Jose State. I had some friends. I had communists around me who loved me and would just sort of tolerate whatever I was going to do. Okay, here in California, not so in New York. And it was really hard. It was hard coming out. I was terrified. And I was terrified of the FBI. And I was terrified of being surveyed. And I was terrified. I was very scared. But then, I can say sex is a powerful influence. And I was fortunate enough to, like I said, to fall in love with Kate, who was wonderful, who did not have this internalized homophobia, having, even with her Lutheran conservative North Dakota background, she did not have it. So that helped me a lot. And I came out publicly to the students on this campus in 1984, when a gay man in the class asked me a question, and I knew he was gay, and I knew he was asking me because he needed help. And I fudged it, you know, like professors do. I fudged it, and I felt terrible about it. And I came back the next day, the next time there was a lecture, and I told the students the truth. I just threw away all that academic stuff that I was supposed to talk about, and I just told the truth. And that was tremendously liberating. So that, I don't know if that helps at all, but that's a little bit of the history. Did you want to comment again or say anything? No?
I'm sorry, I think we're going to have to turn it on.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much for this. This is amazing. I think, like, for me, I'm thinking a lot about, in the context, I wanted your opinion on how you frame and think about and formulate your opinion on a global perspective with regards to, like, everything that's going on in the world with regards to, like, China and Taiwan and North Korea and Russia, and then looking at, like, you know, the context of, like, global capitalization being like a economic driver for the U.S. and, you know, our freedoms and all of these different, like, intersectionalities that we're constantly being, like, bombarded with. And I find it's hard for me to kind of navigate and, like, figure out how to formulate my personal perspective from a personally how I view it as, like, a third wave feminist perspective. I don't know if that makes sense, or if how do you kind of navigate that?
Well,
I know that's a loaded question, but
no, it's not loaded, it's just complicated in that sense, because there's so much going on in the world, and there's so much dislocation. So I read about it every day. So for example, I mean, you didn't mention it, but China has occupied in a classical settler colonialist way Tibet. And the left in the United States has said almost nothing about it, which baffles me. I don't understand, because they are now forcing Tibetan children into boarding schools. If we know anything about U.S. history, we know that this was done to native and indigenous children in this country. So I think about Tibet, and I think about China. And then I think about China and Taiwan in that context. I think about China and what China is doing in the South China Sea and the Philippines. It's an empire, and it's building, and it's quite capitalist, despite having a communist party in charge. You know? And it's an ancient culture, and it has an awesome history. China's history is amazing. And so that's, you see what I'm, and then there's Hong Kong and the repression of any kind of dissent in Hong Kong by the Chinese government. So I look at that, you know, and I look at the destruction of Tibet, which is at the top of the world where all the major rivers in Asia start. And the strip mining, it's not strip mining, it's strip lumber. You know, the taking of the lumber, and it's catastrophic. You know, then let's look at Brazil and the Amazon and and the cattle industry and the indigenous people there who are being driven out. And that's also capital, you know, so it's empire, to my point of view. It's empire, yes, it's capitalism, it's imperialism, it's colonialism. And I look at what Israel is doing in Palestine right now. It's awful. I'm Jewish. I'm torn apart by it. That this could be going on. It's a genocide. It's a genocide. The suffering of the Palestinian people is unconscionable. Right? By the way, try talking to people in the Jewish community that you were talking about, you know, which we do. We do our best. We have conversations with people who are driven by fear, mostly, and racism. So I'm just saying and then the other thing, I would put the whole thing into the context of global warming, which you see is now at certain tipping points where land is becoming uninhabitable. And so people are being forced to migrate. And then you have this crazy hostility to people of color in Europe. The racism in Europe is awful. Do you see what I'm... So to me, it's all intertwined with things. And what has to happen is, I mean, from my point of view, the only way for people to understand this is we're not separate. No one is other. We're all in it together. And the rising of compassion, no matter where people are from or who they are, or the suffering that they've experienced. Look at what's just happened in Bangladesh. The students in Bangladesh just had a big uprising and overthrew the government. A woman has just been named prime minister in Thailand. For the first time in history, there's a woman president of Mexico who's Jewish. Do you see what I'm getting at? So I don't really have an answer for you, but I can suggest to you how I think about it.
And your answer was compassion.
Yes, it is compassion. That's correct. Yeah, in all directions. Thank you for saying that.
I think in light of everything that you just brought up and all of the great comments that you shared with us that are coming internationally, is there going to be a 5th lecture in your series? And if yes, which I hope there will be, maybe give us some insight on how you might add the international layer to it.
Michael? I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. I will tell you that I've been trying to convince Angela Davis to do one of these courses because, see, her approach on prison abolition is like all-encompassing. You know what I'm saying? It's like it takes so much in. And she does have a tremendous international approach, you know, transnational approach. And so we've talked about it. And she says things like, yes, she's willing to do it. And then it sort of doesn't. But if I got 100,000, she would get 1 million. You know what I'm saying? I mean, because people know the name. And she's still perfectly capable of doing a marvelous 4 lectures. You know, she could. So that's one way. Is I'm just one little, you know, and I don't know too much. And then there's other people that know a great deal more. So she's one of them. There's other people as well, but that's one of my thoughts about it.
As the parent of an 11-year-old female identifying child, in some ways I feel so hopeful for my daughter because she's growing up in a world where she understands that gender is a continuum, and she has so many more choices. She has a gay and lesbian advocacy group at her middle school. And so it feels so wonderful that she has options that weren't available even to me as a child. And at the same time, almost every one of her friends has a cell phone and spends hours a day online. And social media is so much a part of these children's lives. And the body dysmorphia and the cyberbullying that's occurring is really hard to navigate as a parent. And I think a lot about it in the context of feminism. And I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Well, first of all, it's beautiful that you have an 11-year-old female identified child. And she's very lucky to have you as a mother. So every generation, all the kids coming up face various issues and so on. I mean, we all did, and we always will. You know, you see there's a continuum there. And yes, the internet right now and the social media is very toxic, or it can be very toxic. It can also be used to mobilize mass demonstrations. It's neutral in that sense. It's a technology. The technology itself is neutral. It's what you do with it, you know. So I realize that there's terrible bullying that goes on and terrible things that are said to kids. And the cell phone, you know, that everybody's on their cell phone all the time, including on this campus. You try driving. You know, like I almost hit a woman the other day because she was on her cell phone and I was backing out. She wasn't paying any attention. Thank goodness I saw a flash of color in my mirror and I hit the brake. And she didn't even she was, you know, so we all are. You know, my cell phone's in front of me, but that's only so I could tell the time. I don't do too much on social media, but that might be my age also. Anyway, I just think you have to be, the main thing that children need, in my view, especially female children, but also young guys, is the emotional support of their parents. To feel that you're with them, that you're listening, that you're partisan, and that you also have great, that they always know rock bottom love. That's what matters. You know, that's the base. And for a lot of children I know, a lot of young adults that I've talked to, it might not have been their parent, it might have been a grandmother or an aunt. But there's got to be somebody in their world that that loves them unconditionally, and that they feel that love and know it. And then that's the base that helps them to navigate. Then you can teach them various things about how to navigate from your own experience, which is all you can do. But that's my thinking about it. Yeah. Now I have a daughter who's now approaching 50, which is terrifying. Because I was 30 when she was born. So, you know, and she teases me, and she's approaching 50. She's a powerhouse, looks a lot like me. Is that true, Eve? Are you still here somewhere? Is that right? Right? She looks a lot like me. And yeah. And we, you know, Kate and I did our best to help her to navigate. And she has a lot of issues that we couldn't necessarily help her with at the time. You know? And she knows that we love her. She knows that we're there for her. That's rock bottom.
Everyone, please join me in thanking the Alumni Association and Dr. Bettina Aptheker. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're going to say a few words.
No, this is really it. Just a big thanks. Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful presentation, and it was so great to hear about your current work. And thanks everybody for the wonderful questions and engagement. Carrie, can I hand it off to you to wrap us up?
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you. I'm Bettina. You are amazing. Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Napolis. I am a class of 91 Porter American Studies major who is one of the lucky ones who got to come back to UCSC to work. So for the last 9 years, I've been the Humanities Director of Development. So I'm one of the people who, in my role, gets to work closely with Bettina, which is a special joy that is undescribable. So when it came time for Bettina to announce her retirement, we said we really need to find a way to honor you and your time here at UC Santa Cruz. We looked at the data, and conservatively, we think that in the Intro to Fem class, which I took, who else took Intro to Fem with Bettina in this room? Okay. Yeah, that too. Conservatively, we estimate that Bettina taught over 16,000 students that class. And in my time, in my role, I get to meet with different alumni, and to a person that I speak with who took that class, they all say the very same thing. It changed my life. Every single one, including me. So we talked to Bettina and we said, what would you like to do? What would matter to you most? And together we created a fund that's named for Bettina, the Bettina Aptheker Scholarship, which supports students, undergraduate and graduate students, whose work relates to, I'm gonna get this right, sexual, gendered, and or racial violence, to further the research or to do community service. So that matters to Bettina. We have enough, we garnered enough support to make it an endowment, so that is now a permanent endowment that supports scholarships in honor of Bettina. So if Bettina matters to you and you want to see students who are doing the work that matters to Bettina, that's going to address many of the things that we talked about tonight, UCSC students becoming the future leaders our world needs, I invite you to contribute to the fund. You can do a search online, Bettina Aptheker Scholarship at UCSC. If you can't find it, you can come and talk to me too. I have cards here. I'll write my email on the whiteboard. You can take a picture of it and get in touch with me if you want to talk with me more about it. Thank you, Bettina.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. Thank you.